'Tis the season for love and enchantments and princesses and handsome princes and such like. But lately, former fans of these ideas just aren't feeling it, especially from the Disney side of our magical fandoms. When the big mouse keeps getting into big brand trouble, how's a Christian fan to respond? Josh Shepard brings a balanced biblical perspective into the studio. Welcome back to Fantastical Truth, the Magical Kingdom podcast from Lorehaven.com, in which we explore fantastical stories for God's glory. I'm Steve Burnett, Lorehaven's publisher and co-author of The Pop Culture Parent, and I just got back from a sold-out showing of Pixar's Turning Red in theaters. I could barely even get in. I had to fight all these other fans in red panda suits.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and I am ready to go to infinity and beyond for episode 199. How should Christians fight to love a declining Disney?
Yeah, I was being sarcastic there earlier. They weren't actually wearing panda suits. They were dressed up like political activists. That's a kid on top of a kid, and it was all adults there at the showing. But in fact, I didn't actually go to a showing at all. Apparently, Pixar's been trying to put some of their direct-to-streaming movies in theaters to make up for lost time. It's apparently not working out very well. I wish them the best. I think it was a bad decision to decide to go all in on the whole streaming ordeal. Guys, lockdowns are over, but Disney's got a lot of ground to cover, a lot of rep that's been lost with fans because of a lot of bad decisions that they've been making. In fact, just this past week, we've seen some consequences of their bad decisions that we'll talk about once Josh enters the studio shortly.
I think if you wanted to summarize what's going wrong with Disney, they are breaking one of the original commandments of screenwriting, which is, if you want to send a message, use Western Union. So this is a timeless screenwriting technique that everyone has obeyed, at least everyone that wanted to be a successful screenwriter, because most fans do not want a sermon in their story. Even if they agree with it, it just doesn't make for good storytelling. And a lot of what Disney has been doing in their stories is trying to push a sermon. People just naturally revolt against that. We don't go to a movie to be hectored or to be lectured or to be guilt or shamed. We go to a story to escape or to be entertained or to just enjoy something funny. It's sad to see this with Disney. And that's a lot of what we'll talk about today, is that we are not an all or nothing fan of, or anti-fan, or whatever you want to call it. We are not all or nothing consumers of Disney here. We like some things and don't like some things, but we're not going to throw everything out.
Exactly. In fact, we don't have to do that thing where we say that all the secular stories are bad, so therefore you need to get this lame Christian alternative. In fact, at Lorehaven, we seek out great stories that are just well made with excellence and that happen to be made by Christian authors. And every Friday we review them, like our last review for The Fox and the Dragon. As this episode releases, that was our most recent review. And then this coming Friday, we have another review of a fantasy novel called The Tomb of the Sea Witch. So that's coming up, and then more reviews every Friday. You can subscribe free and get those along with any of our new articles and podcast episodes weekly. That's at Lorehaven.com. We'll also email you the secret access code to join the Lorehaven Guild, where you can partake in monthly book quests, which reminds me of our upcoming sponsor as well, Enclave Publishing, the top sponsor today, with their new fantasy novel, Mortal Queens by Victoria McCombs. They vanish without a trace, disappear into the night. Each year on the Center Island, one girl is chosen to be the next mortal queen of the idolized Fae. The mortals praise these lucky girls, but their daughters are never seen again. The Fae realm is eternal night, where disputes are settled by chess matches, power is acquired through the most devious kinds of trickery, and 7 elusive kings roam. The Fae hide their faces behind masks and guard their glass hearts to keep them from shattering. But beyond the veil of this luxurious paradise, a dark secret simmers, for their queens have disappeared. When aspiring artist Althea is selected, she is desperate to avoid the same mysterious fate. With no one to trust, she conceals messages in paintings and receives anonymous replies from a stranger who slowly reveals the tale of a girl who outwitted the Fae. Only if she is clever enough will Althea survive the fate of the mortal queens, as long as the king who cannot love does not claim her first. Mortal Queens is book 1 of the Fae Dynasty series by Victoria McCombs, and it just released this month. And it's available wherever books are sold. You can get it in hardcover, digital, or audiobook. We got all the links in our show notes for episode 199, or go to lorehaven.com/podcast. Zach, it sounds like all is not well in that particular Magic Kingdom. And although there's a lot of stuff that isn't well at Disney, let's snack on some concessions before our guest arrives. Our title of this episode actually emphasizes a incidental theme that we are doing on the podcast this month. Our title emphasizes fighting to love things and not just rant about them or reject them. And I realize that we're speaking into a culture that is increasingly shaped by a cottage industry of online pundits and social media profiles, YouTube channels, etc., that put up these kind of intentional outrage bait headlines like failure or loser or morons, and they get kind of mean about it, and they kind of do this bullying, taunting of companies like Disney. And no, I'm not saying won't someone stick up for the poor, defenseless, multi-billion-dollar corporation. I wouldn't say that, but I want to recognize that Christians are called to reward what is good and punish evil. Don't get those out of proportion. Yes, Disney's been making absolutely terrible decisions just right up until last week, where they got hit with the Gina Carano lawsuit. And frankly, I read the entire lawsuit. She seems to make a pretty solid case there. And unless Disney has something more persuasive to say, Christians are supposed to listen to both sides in a case like that. It seems like she has the edge. Maybe they'll settle out of court. And I don't know if that means we'll have Cara Dune back in the Mandalorian verse, but Disney is all about dreams. So that is my dream. That is my wish. I hope that they would make come true. So I'm going to wish upon a star. But some criticisms of Disney, though, and we'll get into this, are just invalid, or they're badly out of proportion. We can kind of act like they were always better or almost Christian in the past, and now they're just evil. Like, yeah, guys, like the corruption was kind of there all along. Lately, it's just somewhat metastasized. Discernment, as Zach said earlier, means that we critique the bad, that is true, but also praise the good. We hope to do those in this episode in biblical proportion.
Yeah, well, I think it's fine to take a break from certain brands and just try out some new things. I don't think we have to have an all or nothing mindset. Like I said, we don't have to throw out a brand and say there's nothing good that can come of this ever again, and everything I ever enjoyed was horrible and I was so wrong and now I've seen the light. I think that's the knee-jerk reaction to so much in so much online culture now. It's just to become completely tribal and just everything is black and white. And I don't think it really works that way, because Disney is a really big company with a long history that employs a ton of creators. And so one group of creators might be captured by activist ideology, but another might not. And, maybe still some of your favorite stories get infused with a little bit of this stuff, but it might be against the creator's wishes. It might be a studio executive or something like that. And that's just out of that creator's control for the most part, unless they just want to quit and be fired over it or something. So I don't think it's quite as simple as we'd like to make it, that Disney is one thing. It's a lot of things. And maybe they're turning towards good things, maybe not. I think time will tell. I think they are finding out the consequences of their own actions, and hopefully they will learn from those consequences. But I think we don't have to be embarrassed that we've enjoyed a recent or a classic Disney movie. I think that's kind of where things get a little bit unhealthy, is where we start to shun each other, or we feel like we are betraying the cause of whatever this boycott is that we're doing now. Now, I will say that the point of a boycott is to change the behavior of a brand. So if the boycott doesn't quite change the behavior, then okay. But once it does, then you should reward them. Like you said, Stephen, we want to reward the good. I think where it gets a little murky is when things haven't really changed. And so, that's a big thing people are debating with Bud Light right now, because some conservative leaders say, oh, you should give them another chance. And some say, no, the boycott must continue. And it just has to go back to, what is the point of it? And why are you even doing it? And why are you drinking beer, guys? Come on. Stop drinking beer.
It's not even a Christian thing to do. And even if you would, don't drink a pagan, weak, listless vessel like Bud Light. I also want to acknowledge that we have a lot of material about popular culture at Lorehaven. Previous episodes of this podcast, every year we kind of try to do a recap of the best and worst of the previous year. We have a whole slew of links in the show notes, both from Lorehaven as well as from the Disney news last week, so you can see what we are seeing. But I wish to say before Josh enters that I think a great example to follow here in terms of engaging with Disney or any large popular culture company like that is Gina Carano. If you see her social media interactions and her interviews afterwards, like she is very disappointed and I'm sure angry at the punishment that they inflicted on her for saying like maybe some very not great, not very PR friendly opinions, but she obviously crossed whatever progressivist ideology they were enforcing, whether it was on paper or just expecting, sort of a verbal agreement. She crossed that. She behaved not entirely culturally leftist, and so she attracted a lot of bullying, and then eventually got fired for it. And now she's suing them, and I think that she should. But even in the lawsuit, you can see not only evidence of what she was actually doing on social media, trying to show love and compassion even to those who were bullying her. But she did draw some boundaries when they were trying to submit her to some kind of corporate re-education. She did draw her boundaries there, and I think rightfully so. But I think most importantly is she shows grace and compassion to her co-stars. She actually says, or the attorney says in the document, and she also released a statement about that. She says that she has had nothing but positive interactions with her former co-stars on The Mandalorian, which I suppose would go right up to the top, the guy whose face you see occasionally and who does the voice of The Mandalorian, Pedro Pascal. She credited, what's the name of the chap who just died? He played Apollo Creed, Carl Weathers.
Carl Weathers.
Yeah, who directed a couple of Mandalorian episodes and was just extremely kind to her. Rest in peace. Yeah, just a very solid mentor figure, obviously, for her. And then several of the other actors, one of whom defended her publicly. And so it's wonderful to see these examples of the good, even amidst the corporate nonsense. And she hasn't had anything bad to say about Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau. And frankly, I don't think it was their fault. I think this decision was made for them. They obviously had, plans for her and for her character in the Star Wars world. But just her attitude of drawing boundaries, but also showing like a kind of Christian compassion there. I don't know if she's a Christian. Sometimes she seems like it. She's at least coded culturally conservative, that's for sure. But I think we need to follow her example there. And the example that Josh sets as well. And speaking of knee-jerk reactions, I hear this strange sound on the rooftops. What is going on? Josh Shepard just rolled down out of the fireplace, apparently prancing about the London rooftops. He's now covered in soot, which is to be expected when you're talking about Disney and other popular culture. He'll just start singing here in just a moment. Josh Shepard is a journalist, editor, and communications professional who often reports at the intersection of religion and culture. His articles have appeared in media outlets including Christianity Today, The Federalist, Family Theater Productions, and The Royce Report. A graduate of the University of Colorado and native of the great state of Texas, Josh has lived in the Washington, D.C. area for over a decade. He and his wife, Terry, also run a marketing consultancy called Shepard Strategies. They stay busy raising two kids, currently ages 3 and almost 5. You can see a bunch of his most recent articles in the show notes. And Josh, you can just put your chimney sweep over there in the corner.
Thank you, Governor. Hello.
Guys, he's going to do the entire show in the Dick Van Dyke British accent, which fans just love hearing about. But nonetheless, Josh, we're glad to finally have you in here to talk about some Disney stuff.
Thank you, Stephen. And Zach, great to be with you both. Yeah, I know I'm not going to do the very awful Cockney accent that Dick Van Dyke is known for. 98 years old, still a Disney legend. Appreciate that.
That is amazing. And one of the best elements of popular culture. Dick Van Dyke is one of those celebrities that, I don't remember his exact family history. For all I know, he could have been married 18 times by now, but he's got one of those universal fan appeals now because he's lived so long and he's so famous, like Betty White or who's the name of the woman who played Wonder Woman originally, Lynn Carter. They're just some things you just don't criticize, and until recently, Disney has been one of them. Recently, that is, I'm guessing about 5-10 years ago, just sort of as we've talked about on this show, the log jam broke and suddenly fans felt safe to blast Disney for understandable reasons and less understandable ones, which leads Disney fans, at least of their legacy stories, with the difficult task of fighting to love what they love. But let's start with chapter 1, however, a recognition that Disney has had a lot of flops and not so secret agendas and activism. Just going to get the bad news out of the way here. And even after we had planned this show and scheduled you, Josh, We had the news breaking on February the 6th that Gina Carano, the actress who played Cara Dune in the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, had been going after Disney now with a lawsuit. I'd actually saw the tweet not too long ago when Elon Musk bought Twitter, and he said, hey, if anybody's been discriminated against, possibly illegally based on your social media activity, speak up now, we'll help you out. She actually said, I think that would apply to me. And then what do you know? It turns out they think that it does. And I read the entire opinion, which starts off, by the way, with a Star Wars style crawl, is saying a short time ago in a galaxy close to home, Gina Carano did this and the Walt Disney Empire did this, and they just have fun with it. And then 65 pages later, I felt that they made a really strong case, especially when they said that other stars of The Mandalorian, including Pedro Pascal, the face and voice star anyway, had posted whatever the heck politically charged stuff they wanted, arguably even more offensive on social media, and the company didn't do jack about it. Whereas Carano faced a lot of bullies on social media because she wouldn't put pronouns in her bio. There's a lot of criticism about Disney's not so secret agendas that is valid. And a lot of Disney fans, not just for political reasons, but cultural reasons, now believe that these issues with the company represent a very real threat to social morality and even public policy, but are especially threatening to kids. What I think is undeniable is that the company now, and they just had an earnings report last week as well that you were keeping up with, Josh, has now lost a lot of brand credibility as well as plain greenbacks. So do you want to just speak to that, Josh, and not just maybe some opinions on that, but factually, what has been happening with the company of late and how has that impacted their bottom line?
Yeah, they've definitely been on the decline, no question. Last year, I think, was sort of, a coming to a head of a lot of things. And so many of their films just didn't perform at the box office. We can all see that. 2 of the Marvel ones, you have the Marvels, which I think, I don't know what that was, the 31st or something in the franchise or something like that. It's been a long time, obviously, now that we've seen the MCU grow and expand. Didn't do well. The Marvels was a huge miss for them. And then prior to that, the Ant-Man sequel as well didn't do well. So that was a couple of them. Haunted Mansion, I think we all expected didn't do well. Another theme park ride, inspired take on that ride and story. And then Wish, which was, kind of very much tied into the Disney 100 hashtag campaign that they, really promoted in a big way, was supposed to be sort of this culmination of so many princess themes and magic. And it's the origin story of the wishing star. And no one really went for it. It really did not do well. Was a just massive miss for them as well. And so just reflective, I think, of some things that just didn't work last year. And then, we've seen this over the last few years, that there's been basically a movement among conservative families, among, families kind of broadly in the culture that are seeing Disney move in a more ideological direction, seem to be prioritizing ideology, the preaching of a certain progressive gospel, you might say, over just good storytelling. I think some people overstate that a little bit. And so I don't want us to necessarily overstate it. And I kind of try to look at Disney in those various, obviously Lucasfilm is in its own environment. Pixar is its own environment. Disney Animation Studios is its own place. So there are little divisions within Disney you kind of have to look at and see, okay, there are some producers here who are really trying to tell good stories, don't seem as ideological driven. But then obviously there are certain enclaves where you can tell, okay, they're obviously calling the shots, and it's that audio you referenced that was surreptitiously recorded, where they talked about the queering of Disney and the not so secret agenda, etc. So it's almost like no matter where you stand on those issues, I think parents are like, why would Disney be the one to introduce these themes and these topics to children, especially when you're talking about toddlers and very, very young children? So.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that I feel as a parent. So I've got kids in elementary, middle, and high school. And it's really the sense of betrayal that I feel as a parent from Disney, that Disney used to be the safe option. There's a lot of things so we have Netflix, we have Prime, we even get HBO for free because of our cell phone plan. There's very little on there that we let our kids just watch. We already knew that these were minefields. But Disney was supposed to be the I don't have to think about it. It's like the easy button that I press, just put Disney on. And, to be fair, there has been a lot of criticism towards Disney for a long time. just basically the follow your heart, trope, or the insta love, love at first sight kind of stuff. And it's not that Disney is pure as the driven snow, but I don't have to worry quite as much about it as I do with other things. It's not as overtly harmful to children through storytelling. So when Disney kind of took this hard turn towards ideological activism through their stories, it was the shift. It was the delta in the direction they were going, and now this new direction that was so jarring that it's a sense of whiplash. And it's like, well, wait a second. This is what I canceled. A lot of people canceled Netflix to get Disney. And so now they're like, wait a minute, now you're in the same camp as why I canceled Netflix in the first place. We canceled Disney, just full disclaimer, but part of that was just due to the price increase. They jacked that up quite a bit. And now many of the other streaming services are doing that because they're also having a lot of flops and trying to recoup that money.
Yeah, the trick there with the cost issue with Disney Plus is you always get in on Black Friday. So they have their few day deal, and it's like literally a few dollars, a year versus like the $16, $17 that they're at right now per year. So something to be aware of for folks. We've just tried to resubscribe. And by the way, you have to have a different email address whenever you do that. So just be, so that's the secret. That's the way to get like, a third of the cost than you normally would with Disney. So
I think that works out then that Zach's family would have been among those subscribers who dropped Disney Plus, and then Josh were reflected in that earnings report. Now, we're not a business profit investor podcast, but it is interesting then to see at least some evidence of the often casual, flippant catchphrase, go woke, go broke, to see that does impact the bottom line. And again, I think a discerning Christian would need to defend what is good and oppose what is evil, regardless of whether it's profitable for the company. Like, I don't care whether or not they win or succeed. If they are distributing bad ideas, false religions, then we need to oppose them. But it is nice to have a little secondary evidence that, like even people who are not Christians are not into this stuff. I did see from that earning report that they had lost a lot of subscribers, but that they had also shed some debt for the Disney Plus streaming service. So might refer to some previous episodes we've done about streaming and the bubble bursting and all of that. Netflix, for all of its faults, seems to be keeping its reputation and its subscriber base, even while it also has a lot of debt. It is just much more solvent, apparently. But Disney Plus and Paramount Plus and all the other pluses, they are actually in the minus, in the red there. And that leaves Disney desperate. For example, Josh, you told me, I didn't see this because you were watching the news, that Disney was going to release a surprise sequel this year. I guess we now know how far they'll go.
Yeah, exactly. So Moana 2 comes out in November. That's actually something that
this November.
Yeah. So it had been in the works for, I guess, a couple of years, year and a half, 2 years, from their TV animation division out of Vancouver. So, and then now, Iger says, well, I saw it and it just really surprised me how good it was. Like that's not usually what I find when I'm seeing a lot of the series on Disney Plus necessarily. And, he's like, we're just going to transform this into a theatrical release. The Rock is involved. So that's at least maybe a plus in their favor. He's a known factor in that the role of Maui, but you don't have Lin-Manuel Miranda, so who did all the songs, for the original. He and Mark Mancini co-wrote them. You do have Mark involved in this one, but so it's a very Lin-Manuel film, the first one, and interestingly, that was the most streamed film last year period among all services.
Moana was,
Moana, which so they see, I think, dollar signs obviously when they're like, okay, we can take this to theatrical. Our other sequels and things that we're working on weren't ready yet. Let's pull the surprise and do Moana 2 in November. Interestingly, too, the stock market has been very positive about that, and the stock price for Disney has soared, I think, on that news. So, like you say, the financials are going to go up and down with Disney. We want to be about, principles and, looking at the deeper issues.
Yeah, I would say too, I think the Star Wars chaos has a lot to do with their earnings, because when they acquired Star Wars, that brought a ton of people into the Disney universe. That's why a lot of people got Disney Plus. That's why we got it. We wanted to watch The Mandalorian.
That's why I got it. That's exactly why. And Mandalorian season 1 and 2 are still very good. I'll talk about those in chapter 3.
When they announced, I think it's Rangers of the New Republic, which I think Gina Carano was supposed to be in. And
yes, she was going to be the star, like the A tier instead of B tier. That's actually all spelled out in her lawsuit.
Right. And there were one or two other shows that look really, really interesting. And it's like, I would love to see those happen. And then they didn't. All those shows got canned for whatever reason. So that's like, well, what are we left with, the Star Wars fans? Oh, we're left with Kathleen Kennedy still being in charge of Star Wars, which no true Star Wars fan likes. Everyone
Kathleen
says
Kennedy,
boo.
No, Kathleen Kennedy's under the bed.
Yes, I've seen the clips. Not the whole thing because I'm a Christian, but I have seen the South Park clips.
Yeah. So, most people want to see her fired and she's not. And so usually that's how a company does an about face. They say, okay, this person's no longer going to be in charge. Like, yeah, they've done some okay things since then, which we'll talk about. There's some hopeful things, but she's still the face of Star Wars, and she's very controversial, to put it lightly. When you have a very controversial person still in charge, it seems like it's just going to be business as usual.
Zach, have you seen Andor?
I have. I loved Andor.
Yeah, Zach's a big stand for Andor. I still need to see it just based on Zach's recommendation.
Right.
The way he sold it to me was like, it's as if Zack Snyder did a Star Wars series. And I'm like, well, sign me up. Rebel Moon was okay, but maybe that'll be better than Rebel Moon.
It's like a cyberpunk version of Star Wars in a way. And it's the political intrigue they tried to do for episode 1, The Phantom Menace, without all the silly Jar.R. stuff, basically. But see, even that is like, the confusing thing with that is, it seems like she kind of stepped out of the way and let them do something. But again, it's like there's the public perception that, oh, she's still in charge, so I don't know if I can trust it. Because I think what's happened with so many Star Wars fans is our trust was broken in Disney to produce faithful, retellings or reimaginings of Star Wars. And it's really hard for a brand to get trust back once they've broken it. You have to take really drastic steps to get your loyal fans back. I think the perception is they haven't done that to a great enough extent.
So I'll agree with you to some degree here in that I think the sequel trilogy, of course, was a disaster. Rise of Skywalker particularly is one of the biggest train wrecks that has ever come to the big screen. I also think that Mando season 3 was awful, which, by the way, was really Jon Favreau entirely doing that. And Dave Filoni was off making Ahsoka. And so my contention with Star Wars is that look at Mando season 1 and 2, when Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni are working hand in hand, and they are equally partners in a show, it really does capture the heart of Star Wars. I think Jon has the tech side, he has the filmmaking side, the chops to do it, and the effects look great. And Dave obviously knows the lore. He was obviously dressed up as characters going back in the day, and he is a true Star Wars fan. You have to realize that Dave, who'd just been promoted to the chief creative officer over at Lucasfilm, he is the Star Wars, the fans fan. I mean, he can get into deep discussions of the lore, and he is really George Lucas's Padawan in many ways. George brought him on to Clone Wars to in like the first season to start that show. By the way, he pulled him over from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which he was on the first season of that. So I tend to trust Dave. I know he can get a little bit deep into the lore, and so that's the thing is I think Jon actually helps him. Jon Favreau kind of pulls him back into like, okay, we can't just talk about the space whales and just live in this in these kind of weird things that you've created, Dave. Like, you have to try to bring in the casual fan and make sure you're not getting too deep in the lore. And so they actually balance each other out pretty well. It was disappointing to see Mando season 3, but I think Ahsoka honestly was pretty good. I think it's solid Star Wars storytelling. It's very hero's journey, of her, and it's not like every female character in that is some kind of Mary Sue, perfect character who doesn't have struggles. There actually is a lot there. So I don't know that Kathy is the problem over at Lucasfilm. She can be good at actually empowering creatives, and/or a perfect example. She brings in producer Tony Gilroy, writer, producer, and she really lets him run with that. And that is a very expensive show. So many practical effects involved in that. Looks beautiful and has so much to say about the nature of rebellion and political themes and just the nature of freedom. Really, it's kind of a freedom fighter show. I don't know that Kathy is entirely to blame, and she has an incredible resume of being involved in Jurassic Park and back with Spielberg for decades. So I think that there's probably some outside elements within Disney, maybe occasionally, who are trying to push them in a more ideological direction.
Well, in that case, it's not just Disney that's being affected by these. It's all manner of studios. I mean, there's just a whole lot of practical considerations as well as financials. I was just reading today, actually, as we record. There's an article out about how and why Warner Brothers is still going to very possibly just delete, just Thanos snap the Coyote versus Acme film from all existence. They wanted $80 million for it from a streamer, and Paramount was even going to release it to theaters, apparently. It's so weird because like the Coyote and Roadrunner is a Warner Brothers, the Shield came out and that was their thing, and yet they can't even release their own movie. And not only they're going to not release it, they're going to purge it by at least this one reputable account. And fans are in uproar. I'm in an uproar. I'm an original, release the Snyder Cut activist, and now I'm like, release the Coyote cut. Release Coyote versus Acme. I don't want good stories, to be destroyed for such reasons, and yet they're also being eroded. The very idea and purpose of stories is being eroded from the inside by these kinds of pragmatic and or secular religious identity religions. Whether or not Kennedy specifically is at fault, she has become at least a figurehead, maybe unfairly.
She's the symbol.
Yeah. Exactly. And if you are a leader, then it is your responsibility to deal with that stuff. And she has not done that. And by all accounts, that South Park parody tried to kind of play it both ways by having like an evil Kathleen Kennedy from another universe, because multiverse, they're roasting the multiverse at the same time. So fans who decided they're going to hate on Kathleen Kennedy and assassinate the reputation of a Kennedy there, get their way. But also, if you feel like defending her, then you also have the real one that shows up in the cartoon. It's their animated version of a real one. Anyway, that's a bunch of franchise stuff. And I one thing that I hear, and Josh, this may cross over into chapter 2, which we'll get to in a moment. I do hear some fans say, well, this is people who say this because they think they're supposed to say it, but what they really want is different. They say, well, why do we get all these retcons and requels and sequels and all of this? Like, why do they keep extending the franchise? Why don't they ever try something new? The answer is, at least if we're talking about Disney, they had tried something new. You guys, did you ever hear A Strange World? Yeah, failed hard. Not because it was brand new, but because people got a whiff of the agenda that was in there. And they didn't like it. And it may have something to do with Disney trying like kind of whimsical sci-fi, which didn't work out well for them with Treasure Planet in 2002. Too bad. It's a great movie. I'd put that as one of the newer Disney great movies. And it's a very much of a man's hero's journey movie too, by the way. But I didn't see Strange World. Nobody saw Strange World. That failed. Wish failed. Don't know if that's because they thought it was new or just because people were sick of Disney. But now, Josh, we're getting sequels to Zootopia, Frozen 3, and apparently Toy Story is not
12.
actually ended. Toy Story 12, yeah. We're going to be old and rolling around in our Wall-E chairs by the time Toy Story 22 comes out. No, it's actually Toy Story 5, which, okay, I am going to be offering the normie opinion. They should have stopped after Toy Story 3. That was the perfect ending. Do some direct-to-DVD stuff and then stop. But they just keep wanting to open the toy box and play with their old toys. I mean, Woody and Buzz, like, they got separated at the end of Toy Story 4. And it was going to be such a bittersweet ending. Goodbye, partner, and all of that. And now I guess we're just rolling it back. But before we move on, Josh, any thoughts about all those new sequels?
Well, as the saying goes, Disney's a victim of their own past success. You pegged it when you said it is a box office issue. It was about 10, 12 years ago when they were putting out mid-budget films. They were putting out a lot more original type things. And in the last decade under Iger, they definitely went all in on franchises, all in on sequels, because that is what performs, So it's unfortunate. I was encouraged, for instance, by Elemental this last summer. And I know not everyone was. I don't understand all the crit around that, but I thought that was simply a romantic comedy that was pretty fun and pretty cute, that told a male-female romance story in this fantastical world. Initially, I felt like it was going to be too much like Inside Out or Zootopia, but it was its own thing. It's a really great immigrant story, family story, that had, just some fun. It was like my Big Fat Greek Wedding, essentially animated. It was this kind of a cultural differences kind of a love story between this water person and this fire person. So, that was encouraging to me. Now we're getting this whole wave of sequels announced. Frozen 3 as well, by the way, was put in that announcement, in addition to Moana 2, that we're going to get this November. So, yeah, I have very big doubts that those will be worth watching, So it's them retreading ground. It's popular brands. It's what Disney's known for, is franchises. And, it's a repetition of things rather than breaking new ground, and that's unfortunate to see. So
Josh, it strikes me as the 2020s version of the old 1990s direct to home release sequels, where they would farm out the animation to kind of a Dig League type studio in Australia or something, not the the gold tier animators over in the main Disney studio. And then you would get Peter Pan 2, Bambi 2, Lion King 2, Lion King 1.5, Bambi 1.5, Bambi meets Sleeping Beauty 3.5. Like it just kept going and going, and people got tired of it. And previously the Disney strategy had been, hey, these are animated classics. They are Americana. They are part of your parents' generation, your great grandparents' generation. We're going to keep them in this secret vault, a pocket dimension that can only be opened with the magic words on special 25th and 40-year anniversaries. And then you'll get the glorious VHS clamshell package. I remember we got the Cinderella, the VHS in 1995, which we watched on the way to Walt Disney World. And it was so much Disney, so everywhere. And now just Disney is just everywhere. And it's kind of lost its specialness, and it's kind of lost that prestige, because if all of their movies are supposedly super duper classics, then none of them are, or so goes the perception.
Walt used to say, "I don't do sequels because you can't top pigs with pigs." It is what he said about not doing a sequel to the Three Pigs, etc. So he maybe did one or two sequels. I mean, he did Savage Sam, which was a sequel to Old Yeller.
I've never heard of that. I'm today years old when I heard about this. That was a live action, though, not an animated.
Well, you won't find it on Disney Plus. There are hundreds of Walt era films that are missing from Disney Plus. So, unfortunately, you won't. It's not commonly known. There are some reasons for that. Well, I'm sure I know in the next segment, as we'll go into that, there are some reasons. That some films perhaps are not always the most culturally relevant or sensitive in some of these manners. But I love that he was about originality. He really did have that understanding of like, he wanted to tell different genres. He loved fantasy. He told the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne stuff. He told Treasure Island back in the day, but he also did a lot of historical stories. He did other types of legends and fairy tales. So it's like he was always and he really pioneered not only the animated feature film, but also documentaries and telling a story with documentaries. So there's a lot of ways that he was curious about a lot of things, and he gave you that variety. You definitely don't see that as with the company today.
So now that we're defending Walt Disney a little bit, but also challenging some of his worldview, we're going to jump into chapter 2 about that. This is a really important one, I think. And that's where we start moving from the rightful negativity and the skepticism about Disney to maybe some mythologies that people have concocted in order to be a little too nostalgic. And maybe we need to challenge those as we move towards fighting to love the best of Disney. First off, however, we notice that the magic is gone from Disney. It's been lost. And so we'd like the lost magic to return, which leads me to our sponsor, number 2, author David Liberto, with his fantasy novel Return of the Lost Ones, which features 2 young men, 2 legendary families, 1 infamous, 1 noble. Their fateful choices converge in a tale of adventure and peril in Return of the Lost Ones. As Pol, born to a line of blessed heroes, strives to reclaim his family's honor, Stefan faces a crossroads that could lead to ruin or redemption. Together, they must unite to save a village from the grip of darkness and creatures of myth. Will they rise to the challenge or be consumed by the legacies that haunt them? Discover their stories in the thrilling first book where honor, bravery, and legends collide. Begin your journey with Pol and Stefan, where every decision shapes destiny. That is Return of the Lost Ones, a fantasy novel from David Liberto. You can find that awesome cover and more info in our show notes for episode 199 or at lorehaven.com/podcast. All right, chapter 2, myths about the magic. Josh, what are critics getting wrong about Disney? What do we see that maybe some people are painting previous versions of Disney in way too positive a light in order to make the news now seem even worse than it already is?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I respect Walt Disney as an innovator and as a producer, and he's a unique man. He was a singular figure in the 20th century, and so the first to integrate sound into picture, so many other things in terms of animation. Created the first animated feature film, introduced the idea of theme parks, the man was a genius when it came to combining sort of art and commerce. Some people have this picture of Uncle Walt. He used to be on Sunday nights. He'd be in the on the TV on ABC.
I'm here to tell you about my latest picture.
Yeah, introduce the wonderful world of Disney. He'd give you the latest stuff that was going on at Disneyland, and that was a persona. He was not. He wasn't. He was there to make money. I mean, he was a genius as a businessman, and so. But he also, I think, understood creativity. He understood some of the base values of America. And the base values of the society at the time. And so, I don't think he was an Orthodox Christian. I just don't see that in his journey. I was telling you, Stephen, I was just reading a Guidepost article that he wrote back in 1949 that talks about the idea of divine inspiration. Really interesting, because he says, "Hey, I take my two daughters to Sunday school every week. I grew up as a son of going to a congregational church every week. I believe prayer is a very vital part of our lives, and that we need to depend on God." And it's like, wow, this is really something. There's some of the things he admits in that he's never said in any other venue. And that was kind of in the first 4 paragraphs of that article. The next 20 are him actually promoting his film that was just out, So Dear to My Heart, and saying, well, there's this prayer angle in that, and let me tell you the whole story. And so you kind of can see it was him saying a bit about his faith at the upfront, but also, promoting his film to a Christian audience, in the other 20 paragraphs of the story. So
that's been going on for a while, is a studio going after the inspirational market using Christianese or evangelicalese or just civil religious jargon, but not actually having a commitment to the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. A figure that was definitely that he was influenced by would be Norman Vincent Peale, which is The Power of Positive Thinking. And that is really kind of a humanist type gospel that is about kind of picking yourself up by your bootstraps. It's not a real focus at all on sin or judgment or the sort of core ideas of the gospel. And you see that even in I think Walt's films like Pollyanna. Pollyanna is sort of an encapsulation of his whole worldview, you would say. And it's worth watching. It's a really interesting film that I think carries his whole message of sort of civil religion. I mean, you see America the Beautiful played in it with, Haley Mills wearing an American flag. But the minister in it, in that film, his
totally cribbing from Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. He was,
and it was death comes unexpectedly. And he's like, I know you don't expect it to come, but it comes, and it's very much this whole judgment and a mocking, in a sense, of a fundamentalist version is what he would say. But, and then the message of the film is, if you look for the bad in mankind, you will surely find it. And, and that's, and so it's very much, Pollyanna plays the glad game, and she looks for the good in people, and she kind of changes people by seeing the good in them. And there's some positive to that. You can, goodness, Fred Rogers was a Presbyterian minister. He believed in some of those ideas, and he brought out the best in people. I see what you're saying there. But if the idea of repentance or sin or judgment is going to, be anathema to your worldview, that's, he wasn't an Orthodox Christian in that sense. You just don't see that carried in his films necessarily. So I don't know if either one of you have thoughts.
Oh, I wonder how the animators who went on strike against Disney back in the day would have thought about this view of optimism. It is unfortunate that there's a recklessness to this kind of optimism that can shield not only the powerful person using it from the consequences of refusing to admit the bad in people, but it also means that, you are, in a sense, privileged enough to be able to be so publicly optimistic, while in the smoke-filled back rooms, you're underpaying people or you are cutting out their artistic achievements from under them. That is unfortunately part of the whole idea of movie making. It is because idols twist human creativity, either at the individual level or the corporate level, certainly apart from Jesus Christ. And that has affected the Disney studio as much as it affected anyone else. And that's not new, folks. Maybe we're just able to see it more because information is spread a little bit more democratically now. And the studio PR system certainly runs in full swing in a lot of ways, but it can't cover up these kinds of things. And anybody with a YouTube channel now can do an entire documentary, for example, about how Walt Disney, Mr. Americana, Mr. Hope for the Future, wanted to literally make a techno dystopian government under his own rule in the Orlando area. That was the original idea of Epcot Center. Domed city or not, the only reason it didn't get off the ground is because, hey, you can't do that kind of thing in America and invite people to live there. They have to have representation in their local government. But you're saying, no, these people are my people. They belong in my dystopian Epcot Center world of tomorrow. That's just not going to work out. And that gets into even some modern politics about Disney's tax breaks and everything over there in the state of Florida. But it just goes to show that I think, yeah, his optimism, his moral worldview was completely unmoored from the gospel, anchored in American civil religion at best. And so you get some traditional values, but yeah, this whole power of positive thinking thing, it's obviously very clear. And in fact, it's interesting that he wrote for Guidepost, because was that not Norman Vincent Peale's magazine?
It was
A bit of a kind of a mainline Protestant, like erosion of the gospel in response to a lot of the more biblical behaviors of the day.
I think you can see the idea of providence and spiritual ideas in just the fairy tales that he pulled forward. So, I mean, from the Grimm brothers, etc., there were consequences to actions. These are ultimately moral fairy tales in many ways, whether it's Cinderella or Bambi, or, it is about the moral choices that these characters make. And I don't know that he was entirely devoid of morality. It's just maybe a real orthodox understanding of Christianity and theology. I wouldn't look to Disney for that, but I think, the idea of conscience, and Jiminy Cricket and all that, that can be a powerful idea that certainly has resonance with the gospel.
I was going to say, just on a practical level, I don't know really whether Star Wars fans like me had the right expectations from when Disney bought out the franchise, 8 years ago or so now. Obviously, they were going to make prequels and requels and spin-offs. And I think what we had hoped was that they would just keep the story going, that they would keep the main saga going. And there was an extent to which I still liked the sequels, because at least it was a new story. But the actual problem with them which was what you just said, Josh, is that actions didn't really have consequences. There was really no meaning to what people chose. So starting, in The Last Jedi, it's like everything they do fail, but it doesn't really matter. And then, of course, somehow Palpatine returned, which just erases the original trilogy. And, but they kind of signaled they were going this way when they declared everything before 2014 to not be canonical. And it's like, well, okay, I can understand how you're trying to start with a clean slate, but you're inheriting a franchise, so you can't really do that. I understand you can't take everything that people have written in the spinoff, books and try to incorporate that, because a lot of that stuff contradicted it. I think the biggest problem was they didn't hold on to like a clear thread. They didn't have a through line that they were going to hold on to and say, we're going to keep going on this thread or this, multiverse or whatever. And they didn't really seem to have a story runner that was holding all of this together. And, this is the same problem that other big companies have had, like that Apple has had since Steve Jobs died. He was an innovator as well as a communicator and a visionary. Typically those roles are in different people. Steve Jobs was unique in that he had multiple of these disciplines in himself, whereas now these are kind of divided among different people. And it was the same way with Walt Disney, that he was a unique blend of a lot of different skills that a lot of CEOs just don't have all at once.
Well, that leads to one of the myths I think that you had pointed out, Josh, is this myth that when Walt Disney died, there hasn't been any good Disney movie ever since, which is just simply not true. Even if you just take into account the Renaissance in the 90s. It started with The Little Mermaid in the late 80s and then kept right on going right through, I think, the end of the 90s with these brilliantly animated classics that were 2D animated. It was just The Lion King, Aladdin, no particular order here. Maybe failed a little bit with Pocahontas and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, but back then, my family wasn't even seeing Disney movies, and this was just lack of interest. I think it had nothing to do with a boycott that eventually came about in the late 90s. But these movies were everywhere. Everybody loved them, and the merch was everywhere, and the Happy Meal toys are everywhere. Or was it Burger King then? I forget. So it's just not true to say, well, Disney's failed ever since, good old Uncle Walt, passed on or got put into cryogenic storage, whichever the legend is there. He died in 1966, but Disney's had a lot of good stuff since then. And then even the early MCU movies, the Marvel movies, like those still hold up. Don't lose that. There are still some good directors and storytellers around, and we'll get to some of those, more of those in chapter 3.
Yeah, I would very much agree with you. I'm enjoying right now introducing my kids to some of the Renaissance films, Beauty and the Beast. I have my little 4-year-old going around singing "Kill the Beast" sometimes, and those are great. Amazingly animated. Just you shouldn't miss the fact that there were many Christians involved in those productions. Glenn Keane, strong Christian believer.
Tangled is fabulous, and he directed that.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it was that film, unfortunately, that was his last with Disney. And he said, "There's too many decision makers, too many cooks in the kitchen here. I'm not having the freedom that I want to do what I want to do." Really sad to lose him. He was a master storyteller, remains a master storyteller. He's trying to do some other things, but Beauty and the Beast, that whole transformation scene of the Beast, to human form. I mean, if you go back to the DVD on Beauty and the Beast, there is a whole special feature where he narrates it and says, "This is about the Christian gospel to me. And this is about, actually the transformation that we experience when we accept Jesus." And it's like, whoa, this isn't a Disney film. And he's a man of real, incredible devout faith. Same with certain figures like a Tom Bancroft, who was involved in Mulan and other productions of that era. So, it is totally false to think that Disney's even best stuff came out during Walt's lifetime. I think there was I do see Mary Poppins, I think, is a high point, and he won several Academy Awards for that film, and it's a brilliant film, and that's the money from that is what enabled him to then build Disney World. I didn't get much into my history with Disney myself, but I kind of married into a Disney family, and my wife's parents met at Disney back in 1977 when they were both working at Tomorrowland. Got married in 79. They went on. He was an Air Force guy, so they moved around the country. But they moved back to Orlando 15 years later, and then my wife Terry worked for Disney. Her dad worked for Disney for a decade in security, and so it's interesting because now I've got to hear about the company from the inside out and understand more of their impact on Central Florida. Which is incredible. Central Florida's gone from 4 million tourists a year to 72 million. Thanks to Disney. So I mean, it's changed an entire state. Through their presence there. But since Walt's death in 66, I mean, they've done films like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is just an incredibly innovative, work. And I even see that in Black Panther, and Chadwick Boseman and the weight that he gave to that role. I think that's a brilliant film that is peak Disney in a sense. You could point to Enchanted as well with Amy Adams and so many good ones that have come out. Remember the Titans with Denzel. Even recently, I would say Elemental and some of the other ones, you can find parts of the company that are doing good work.
Well, and it's just funny to think about the fact that the Chronicles of Narnia came to the screen because of Disney, even though when Walt was still alive, C.S. Lewis adamantly opposed the idea of a Narnia adaptation to the screen. And here's a great quote that was gathered by our friends at Narnia Web. Lewis said this in 1959, quote, "But I am absolutely opposed, adamant, isn't it, to a TV version. Anthropomorphic animals, when taken out of narrative into actual visibility, always turn into buffoonery or nightmare, at least with photography. Cartoons, if only Disney did not combine so much vulgarity with its genius, would be another matter. A human pantomime, Aslan, would be to me blasphemy." And, it's just funny that it's like he couldn't predict, obviously, computer graphic images and the fact that they had a live action Narnia, but with obviously a cartoon, but better than a cartoon. And there was a BBC cartoon which I've never watched. It was a BBC.
It was a live action, and that is buffoonery.
Oh,
a lot of people love it, but yeah.
But there's a cartoon, isn't there? Also,
there's a cartoon, but I don't know much about it. And I would say that that had nothing to do with Disney, though. Yeah, The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe 05 is still frankly the best adaptation. Frankly,
right. I loved it, and honestly, it was because of that film that we got into the books. I probably wouldn't have picked up the books except for the film, and we do have to thank Disney for that. So. Way to go.
Right. And anybody who says, well, Disney is woke now and that's just completely new, do remember that we had us a whole boycott in the late 90s of the Walt Disney Company. Dr. Dobson was doing it, and the Family Research Council was doing it, and the SBC was doing it. It was a whole lot of evangelical greats who decided Disney is no longer friendly to the family. And then, my family too, like, oh, I guess we ought to not go to Disney no more. I think that was kind of ended when Toy Story came out because, well, that wasn't Disney. That was Pixar, and Disney's just helpers. Well, then Disney bought Pixar, so that would have ended it anyway. But The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe, I think, did a lot to dispel some of that bad will toward Disney. They made some legitimately good stuff. Kind of the gay rights idea was just fairly mainstream by then. You couldn't boycott everybody, but the fact is that Disney was an early adopter of that stuff with their gay days in the theme parks. And now you just got the next iteration of that. So all at once, Disney, at least in the last 34 years, has kind of already been doing this, but it is worse now, but they kind of were already doing it. So don't clean up Disney's rep too much earlier. There was a lot of mixed motives, Americana, humanism, positive thinking stuff in there. Discern early Disney almost as much as you would discern new Disney. Well, let's move to chapter 3, though, and talk a little bit more positively about the Disney stuff, past, present, and maybe even future, but not without a nod to our third sponsor, the Realm Makers 2024 conference. Hey, maybe you think you can write better than Disney. If so, then you need training. Since 2013, Realm Makers has been helping writers of fantasy, science fiction, and other fantastical stories find their community and learn their craft from an all-star faculty. Now the Christian-led organization will return to St. Louis, Missouri for its 12th annual live conference this July 18th through 20th, 2024. Public registration opened February 1st at realmmakers.com. Authors can attend in person, staying at the Sheraton Westport Chalet Hotel for the 3-day event, or they can attend the event remotely on the dedicated Realmsphere social network. At Realmmakers, we've been connecting Christian creators for over a decade, said marketing director J.J. Johnson. Our annual conference provides a supportive space where authors can take their next creative steps. Realm Makers is where authors find not just inspiration, but lasting relationships that fuel their success. Get all that info at our show notes for episode 199 or go to lorehaven.com/podcast. All right, chapter 3. Now we get to celebrate. We've had the bad news, almost like the law that leads us to repentance and mourning, and that is real. But we've also seen some myths busted, and there's even a few more we could talk about if time permitted. But let's move into Faithful Fantasy, Chapter 3. How can we love Disney anyway? A verse, Josh, that I was thinking of was Romans 14:16, where the Apostle Paul is talking about controversial issues about which Christians can come to different conclusions. And he kind of summarizes it by saying, do not let what you regard as good be spoken of as evil. And that's part of a whole argument that the apostle is making there. But I think we can also apply that to things like stories that seem tarnished by the bad behaving progressivist or sex identity notions of modern Disney. But let's not lose what was good and what continues to be good. Don't let the present nonsense, for example, ruin your love of old Disney films. And Josh and Zach were talking about some of those whom name checked Enchanted. That was the movie that my girlfriend, now my wife, and I first saw 2007, I believe it was. And there is just almost everything good about that movie. By the way, it wasn't Frozen that critiqued the whole instant love trope. It was Enchanted that did it first. And I understand there was a direct-to-streaming sequel. I never saw it. I hear tell it wasn't all that great. I wish that they had brought in like the same crew who made the original movie, maybe for a more excellent adaptation. It sounded like they were going in a good direction there, but yeah, I didn't want to see the sequel.
Yeah, I did like an hour-long podcast on that with some friends, so you should totally check it out. It's interesting. It's
we'll get that link in the show notes. We really need to do that then.
On Disenchanted, they did bring back Alan Menken to do the songs, and so I appreciated that. That clearly had a direct-to-streaming budget. There were some, scenes in it where like the prince was going to be fighting a dragon, and like it totally was like, wow, where was the special effects here? Because it looks awful.
No.
So it's like some smoke, and you really will be underwhelmed by that stuff. It's a little bit of a female-centric kind of story, where all the male characters are kind of sidelined. And to your point, Zach, about The Last Jedi earlier, that's what I really see in that movie is Poe Dameron. Any decision he makes, any line he makes is immediately shot down. It was some kind of gender politics stuff going on in that film. And that is an aspect of something to be aware of in Disney. It is, I think, certain places. It's not. I don't know that it's like all of it overarching, but if you know the name Stephen Greatanus, great writer who does a lot of Christian thought, and he's pointed out that Linda Wolverton, if you see that name in a script, who's a screenplay writer for Disney, she's done the two Alice movies, the two Maleficent movies. And in both of those franchises, it's very much like, okay, all the male characters are dumb and have no motivation that is discernible, and are, just kind of walking around pointless, and are seen as not don't have agency, and aren't actually active in the story. And so you'll see that in the Alice movies and in Maleficent. And he's like, it's pretty intentional. Like, this is a gender politics thing they're doing here. So something to be aware of. On a show that I liked, that Disney did for a while, Once Upon a Time. The early seasons were good. They had male characters that were active and present, and then the later seasons, it was sort of the female characters were very much dominant in it, and it wasn't like there was an equal sort of partnership and teamwork in how they would go about the plots. Interesting bit of, not that I know we're supposed to be turning our corner here, but that is very much a trend.
It's really hard to let go of the negative stuff, though, because Enchanted was so good. I'm actually even more depressed hearing about Disenchanted. I suppose the title should have been a giveaway. We're going to subvert everything you loved about this story that celebrated the union between a prince and a princess, even though it turns out a little bit different than you expected by the end. It is so devoted to marriage. Like, Amy Adams' Princess Giselle literally breaks down in tears in the middle of a law office at the very idea that two people could get divorced and they would no longer live together forever and ever. And the movie doesn't make fun of her at all. It is using that to actually challenge this whole idea. Look, I understand things happen. Relationships are difficult. Like the couple in the movie, like, obviously they were just fighting over silly things and they really did need to get back together. But it was wonderful to see that celebration of marriage just overt. And obviously someone who was writing that or directing that, or both, like, either they had a good marriage or they'd seen a good marriage and they wanted to celebrate the good rather than tearing it apart and saying, now men and women can't get along. Someone's got to be boss. I don't like that someone's got to be boss thing.
Yeah. And this is a great representation. This is a callback to chapter 1 here. But what's taken over Disney is this zero-sum mentality, that the only way to elevate this group or person or whatever identity is to denigrate this other group or identity. And that's just such a poverty mindset, and just a mindset of just revenge. And it's a negative aesthetic ultimately that doesn't lead to things you love. It just points out the things that you hate. And we have to be careful as fans of stories that we don't have the similar mindset of, well, in order for good Christian stories to excel, then Disney must fail, and we always have to be bombing it. We can still celebrate. And but I mentioned Steve Jobs a minute ago. He was very famous for saying we need to get away from the mindset that in order for Apple to succeed, Microsoft must fail. Now they took plenty of jabs. I'm a Mac, I'm a PC, those commercials, they made fun of a lot of things, but they weren't trying to destroy the other company, because, it's sort of like contagious. Like, once people lose interest in stories, then they're going to lose interest in a lot of things story related. And so we should want there to be good stories. And I think at times we just have to remind Disney of, like, here were your good ones. Like, do more of this. We can, refrain from buying the new ones all that we want, but we should celebrate the classics. I've got on my list to watch The Sword and the Stone with my younger two kids. They've never seen it. That's one of my all-time favorites. We've watched Robin Hood plenty of times, but The Sword and the Stone, I just love that movie. And it's just a fun and a beautiful animation. And so I think by engaging in those things, by focusing on what we love rather than just what makes us groan, I think that will bring about better things. Maybe I'm falling into the positive thinking thing here. I don't know.
No, it's positive thinking that comes after the recognition of guilt and the bad stuff. That's very different. We're not doing the Pollyanna thing here. I think this is more of a Christian view of positive thinking, deconstructing the bad, or really behaving more like a good fan government, rewarding what is good while also punishing what is evil. And punishing just means, I don't want to watch it, I don't want to pay for it. Zach, you mentioned some positive stuff there. I've mentioned earlier, like Treasure Planet from 2002. That bombed at the theaters. It shouldn't have. It was a fantastic, adventurous, whimsical space fantasy boys movie by Clement and Musker, right? That was the Aladdin directors. Like, this was their passion project. They kept putting it off. Disney did. And then they finally said, okay, you can make Treasure Island in space if you really want to. And then it bombed. So I guess it didn't work out. But fans do love it. It's kind of a cult classic. And I really love it. Soundtrack's great too, by James Newton Howard. A lot of the Pixar, I mean, don't lose the good Pixar movies. Guys, like going back to 1995, Toy Story was an actual groundbreaker. Toy Story 2, even more so. Toy Story 3 was a fantastic conclusion to the trilogy. It's like there's an original trilogy for Toy Story and Star Wars. We don't recognize anything else now. And then many Pixar directors, though, are professing Christians. Andrew Stanton of Finding Nemo and Wall-E. He was drawing out in World Magazine, you guys. In 2008, the biblical parallels between the Wall-E story and the biblical narrative. And then Pete Docter as well, Inside Out. And I guess he directed Elemental, right, Josh? So he's a professing Christian.
He didn't direct Elemental. He's just now obviously the president of the company.
That's right. He's executive producer. That's right.
He's been now elevated to chief creative officer of
but he was
Pixar.
He was Inside Out. What else did he do? Yeah,
Up and Monsters Inc.
That's right. That's right. And all of those are very great, like, stories. I wouldn't say they're Christian in theme, but at least my standard here at Lorehaven is, if you're a Christian and you make a story, it's a Christian story unless you got a chip on your shoulder. And I don't think he does. I think those movies are still wonderful.
Yeah, Soul as well, is he was kind of co-directed.
Of course, that's the one I was thinking of.
Wrote that, and it has some interesting ideas about eternity, and not everybody, I think, resonated with it, but he did some interviews around it that talked about how it was very much resonating with his Christian faith. And I think he tried to have it informed, I suppose, even from other religious traditions, he said, about how they saw the afterlife. But it is, his work in general, I think Pete is really interesting to think about as a leader, because I think he has made and created some of the best Pixar films. I mean, Up and Inside Out particularly, and Monsters Inc., all those stand as just incredible, monuments of cinema. And he is a little bit of a arm around your shoulder kind of friendly guy and very introspective. And so for him to become chief creative officer after Lasseter kind of resigned in scandal, obviously, big, a lot of controversy around that. And Lasseter had a particular vision. I think he always, you saw some people like Brendan Chapman leave, Pixar in the midst of, for instance, Brave, because they said, oh, Lasseter's got this one narrow thing and he's trying to push us into this one box. And there was people who didn't appreciate that, but he was tireless. I think very much like Jobs, he had a high creative standards, was trying to push people to know the motivation of the characters, give us a strong story, give us a great third act, and you got that during the Lasseter era. Pete Docter is much more hands off as a creative executive and as an executive producer now over, I think, so you look at this run of films that a lot of people are like, wow, this is way outside the box, Turning Red, and Up, what was that called? Onward.
Onward was nice. People missed it because of the lockdowns, but I liked Onward. I didn't think it was woke. Well, there was one little bit of woke, but it didn't spoil the whole lump. It was a good movie.
And Luca's the same way. I think Luca was a great story of friendship and of kids, on a summer and all this. And, it's a great film. Turning Red, I think, is, a lot of reasons to be concerned about that film. And I think, Pete Docter was kind of hands off. She had a particular vision, the director, and he just kind of, improved it around the margins. I think tried to make sure that it generally, followed the Pixar model and had a quality to it visually. But, the themes of that film are very much anti Inside Out. I mean, Inside Out is like, okay, the teenager running off, by themselves away from mom and dad. She has to come out of that bus and come back and realize that, there's a value and a safety and a love with your parents. Whereas Turning Red is like the mom, her motivation never makes sense. She is a fundamentalist in the worst way, and is not there for her daughter. And it's ultimately the parents who have to change their standards, way of life to sort of fit in with the panda and the Turning Red thing. Which so the whole metaphor of her turning into a panda is about puberty, and there's just a lot of things in that just are are problematic. So all I can say is that I do think that Pete, though, he did. I think Elemental was great. I think that the gentleman who wrote that and did that, which is Peter Sohn, Elemental he wanted to tell an immigrant story, a love story about two different people. It was really well done. And it really accomplished what it was trying to do. I think some of these ones on the horizon for them could be pretty good. Inside Out 2 is coming this summer. Elio is coming next year, it looks like, is their plan for that. And that looks like a really fun adventure. If you've seen the trailer for that, it looks like a really interesting sort of kid encounters this alien civilization. And it's almost feels like kind of Lilo and Stitch a little bit, but looks very classic Pixar from what I can see of Elio. So I have some faith and confidence in Pete. I think if his director has the right idea, then he's going to try to push that in the right way. He's also said in some interviews like, hey, I think we probably make sure that this follows the Pixar model in a little stronger way. So I have some faith in Pete. Another person I know that we're rolling to the end here, but you mentioned about Treasure Planet and the themes of sort of brotherhood and heroism in that. I would also resonate with the Star Wars franchise aspects of it, where they are carrying that through, which is particularly Star Wars: The Bad Batch, the animated show. It's coming up on its third season here. They're going to kind of wrap up that story, but that is a very strong, group of characters, basically kind of an A-team in space kind of a story where they're on these rescue missions. And, you get into the issues of bioethics with the clones and there's some really deep themes in that about even the cost of war and what that does to the people who've with soldiers who've been in that for so long, and how that scars your soul in a big way. And so they don't shy away from those themes. And I think if you're looking at what they did in even season 2, some of it was really strong storytelling, and that's a little slice of most people don't even realize that's that in a sense the Clone Wars journey that's been going on for like 15 years is still kind of wrapping up with that series. But I think Star Wars: The Bad Batch, it's a really strong entry in Disney's animated TV canon, at least. And they people don't realize there's like basically 6 different animation teams within Disney that are doing different things. So it's like they kind of have a lock on animation in other ways. Of course, the other thing would be Andor season 2 is going to be coming. That'll wrap up that story. Again, you should, Stephen, get a secret trial to Disney Plus just so you can watch Andor.
Perhaps I'll go staggering off of a dock and then say, engage in some commandeering. No, I don't actually condone piracy now, but I can't be a pirate anyway because I'm a white man, and the next pirate's got to be a woman of color now, according to some of the casting rumors I've seen. Hey, somehow we got through this whole discussion without even talking about the Snow White remake, which has like bombed before it was even assembled. Yeah. And that's kind of a make or break moment because, they scrambled, that photo got out of the colorfully attired, diverse humans, not dwarves. And whether or not that was a final version, like they really quickly put out a version of Rachel Zegler's Snow White, surrounded by these 7 little persons from a PS3 cutscene. And that was kind of funny, the speed with which they put that together. And I thought, dwarves are not final appearance. I don't know how that's going to work. If they put it, I think either way, if they put out anything like the original version, it's going to fail. But they put out just a kind of a pandering remake as well, then everybody might go see it. It might earn $1 billion, but everybody's going to kind of laugh at the same time. As for me and my house, like we just don't, I hate to say this, we just don't see a lot of movies now. I haven't seen any superhero movies in theaters in a very long time. Last one was Spider-Man, No Way Home, but that's a Sony movie. It's not even underneath the Disney umbrella proper. They just do some profit sharing and such. But animated movies, no interest. Don't subscribe to Disney Plus, and yet I still want them to win. All right, I want Pixar to get its groove back. I think that the lockdowns and this pro streaming monopoly they were trying to do ended up really costing Pixar a lot of brand equity. If a Pixar movie debuts on TV, how is that different from just a made for TV movie? How is that different from a sequel made with the cheaper animators? Like, no, you don't do that. Pixar needs to go first to theaters, and that needs to be the way it is. And I want to see theaters and the theatrical release respected. I don't want to get on my Christopher Nolan soapbox here, but I kind of resonate with that. Zach, any other optimism for Disney /Star Wars /Marvel in the future as we draw to a close?
Well, I've heard nothing but good things from several of my gamer friends about some of the Star Wars video games. And there was just some news that they're partnering with Fortnite to create some other big video game universe, not just for Star Wars, but for all of Disney.
Oh, yeah. Fortniteify all the things.
Yeah.
And that's not working out well for that Suicide Squad game. People seem, at least pro gamers, seem not to like that stuff.
Yeah, but that's like a whole different genre of Suicide Squad.
Right.
But Fortnite is. I had a phase where I really like Fortnite. I mostly like just watching other people play Fortnite because it's a fun game. It's a obviously hyper violent game, but it's also meant to be pretty goofy. And I think that fits well with a lot of the Disney IP. But we'll see. I would love Disney. Disney could go a long way to winning back my loyalty by making a new version of Dark Forces, like the 1995 or whatever PC first shooter game. Or bringing back just great stories like Emperor's New Groove, that was this kind of a sleeper hit. Now I know they made like Kronk's New Groove and as some TV show, whatever. My kids have watched that. But again, it's like, go back to the things you did before. Like, remember your first love, Disney. Like, you had some really good stories in the recent past, like in my lifetime. So we'll see if they do that. I don't know.
So Zach, I don't know if you're aware that Garfield, the movie that's coming out, with Chris Pratt in the role of Garfield, that is like a reunion of the Emperor's New Groove team.
Wow.
It's like the director, the screenwriter, two of the producers. They're all back on that film. So I have no idea if it's going to be any good, but I am intrigued by the fact that it's like a reunion of the talent behind Emperor's New Groove. But I do have to ask, Stephen, you said you don't watch much animation, or did you watch Spider-Verse 2, I hope?
No, I did watch Spider-Verse 2. I'm just saying I haven't seen a whole lot of those in theaters. I've not seen a superhero movie in theaters, animated or live action, since Spider-Man No Way Home.
Oh, you should have watched Spider-Verse in theaters, man.
That's what everyone said. I think I was a little busy, but yeah, it's also, I don't know if I'm just getting old or what, but the animation style, especially during the action scenes, like I kind of need that on a smaller screen. It moves a little too fast for me. Maybe it's meant to just age better on the second or third rewatch, but I did really enjoy it once we finally saw it at home.
That's a groundbreaking movie for sure. The Chicken Run sequel as well, in terms of animation, was very good. That was a lot of fun. Dawn of the Nugget, worth finding some good laughs in that.
Okay, I was an original Chicken Run fan, but none of those are Disney though. Like, Disney's not the only one doing animated action comedies now. There's lots of other great folks.
It's really true. And by the way, another Disney project that's just out on the horizon, not going to be immediate, probably 25, 26, would be, they work with Ron Howard to do a Jim Henson feature-length documentary. And then there's also a Jim Henson biopic that's in the works, which will be interesting if they can find anybody who can perform the Muppets as well as Jim did, and actually try to have a dramatic picture about his incredible journey, because he's just such a fascinating figure. Obviously, they own the Muppets now, and they're working with the Jim Henson Company and Lisa Henson, Jim's daughter, to kind of bring that together. So we'll see if that comes together and what kind of budget it gets and that sort of thing. But there are some intriguing projects like that I feel like might almost take us back to an era when Disney was doing more real life, mid-budget kind of dramas.
Yeah, I think I just heard you say there was going to be a Jim Henson documentary featuring an all Muppet cast. I'm almost sure that's what you said, as well as you saying there would be a Princess Bride remake featuring the Muppets as everybody, but featuring Cary Elwes as the kindly grandfather. I'm sure that's what you said. And along with that, dream projects, Disney can do a sequel to Treasure Planet. I want to know how Jim Hawkins is doing out there, joining the Space Force or whatever it is. But it's never going to be perfect, right? We're not going to get perfect stories from Disney or any other corporation, no matter how traditional or woke or Christian or otherwise. Let us not look to stories for what only our Lord can provide. But Josh can provide some links on the way out before you run back out in the street with your chimney sweep. Where can we find your best work, Josh?
It'll be in the show notes. There's an authory page where I put all my stuff. I write a lot for a number of outlets. Family Theater Productions is a company out of California that's asked me to write a few times a month on family entertainment stuff. So I do work for them, but then a lot of religion reporting that I do for the Roy's Report as well. So you can definitely find my work out there in the show notes, and have enjoyed this, and definitely would encourage folks to pick up your book and everything. It is a great read and a helpful resource.
Oh, Pop Culture Parent. Yeah, well, thanks for the free plug there. Josh reminded me coming in the studio that, he actually interviewed me back in the day about that one. So Really appreciate that help there. And in return, yeah, Josh, we celebrate diversity and inclusion. So we're grateful to have a genuine Disney American in the studio, even if you married into that family. So we just celebrate all ethnicities here. So thanks for coming in, and we'll look forward to having you back to talk about Disney or anything else.
Thank you guys both, Steve and Zach. Enjoyed it. It's great.
Thanks for joining. Well, our thanks to Josh for joining us for this discussion about Disney. And to you, our listener, we want to know, do you still love Disney, or do you find yourself fighting to love Disney? Send us a note to podcast@lorehaven.com, or you can tag us in a comment on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We got a note here from Adam David Collings, who emailed us after episode 198 about sports fans. And he said this, quote, "There is some good, convicting truth in this. Here in Australia, sport is almost a religion. It's generally accepted that everyone is into it, and if you're not, there's something wrong with you, and you're even un-Australian. I think this has led nerds like me to proudly proclaim our indifference to sports ball, and even take pride in our often inflated ignorance of sports. But this is not a loving response. I can't control how others respond to my fandom, but I can control how I respond to theirs." End quote. Adam, that is a brilliant response. Very well put. And yes, I think that's how we ultimately, win friends and influence people and all that, is that we kind of build those bridges. And maybe that'll make people more interested in the books that we're reading, and we can turn them into fellow fantasy nerd fans.
Emmy Duffield on Instagram also remarked about episode 198. I may or may not have read Lord of the Rings during the big game last year. It must have been, as I said in a response, it must have been a very long game with a lot of overtimes if you read all of Lord of the Rings, whereupon she clarified, yeah, I meant that I read part of it. Like, yeah, that's one way to do it. But then, yeah, think about people looking over there like, wow, this person doesn't really watch the game. This person just showed up and wants to do their own thing. And I'd be with her. I'd be like, yeah, I would much prefer going to Middle Earth than whatever giant stadium, certainly during the halftime show, which is probably perverse and disoriented anyway. I kind of want to go into my cozy hobbit hole now. And it makes sense. And maybe then give some people who are sports fans a chance to ask, hey, what are you reading? And then you can realize that maybe there's some similar reasons why we like fantastical tales like The Lord of the Rings, as well as games, even professional football. By the way, time will tell whether or not, Zach, I went to my church's inevitable Super Bowl party. I'm thinking about it as we record. Ask me next week. Hold me accountable. We'll see if I was a good neighbor to the members of my other fandom at my church.
Yeah, I'm going to a party that just some friends of mine are hosting.
You can do it for me. I will borrow the righteousness from your account.
Well, it's just going to be our two families, I think. And because we got little kids who got to get up in the morning, we're going to cut it off at halftime. And, I guess we'll miss Taylor Swift making that surprise performance that I'm predicting, and or coming in at the end to get proposed to.
I think she's going to do the proposing. I'm almost certain that that's
well,
going to be, and then
that
she
could
will
be the
say,
other way. Yeah,
and she will say no to herself and write a song about it, and and all the tropes recur. And I almost get tired of the tropes as much as I get tired of overexposure of a particular celebrity. Do you think maybe she's a little tired of her own exposure too? I mean, she's a human being, you guys. She knows it's a giant corporate machine as much as anything. So there's a lot of the similar principles about Disney that you could also apply to any other fandom, including the Swifties.
Yeah, I do like this idea from our listener about taking a Lord of the Rings book or just any other book wherever you go. And that way you've always got a book in case something boring is happening where you are. My middle daughter does this. She takes her fantasy books to school and reads them during quiet moments in class when they're allowed to. And I actually just recently found out that whenever she's watching, and she told me I could share this, whenever she's watching a show on, a streaming service or whatever, she hits the skip 10 seconds button whenever it's like a boring part of the show. And sometimes she'll skip like entire minutes or half of a show when it's just boring dialogue or something like that. Or, and not to mention like, troublesome or graphic content or whatever. And I just thought, why don't I do that? Why do I watch all these boring parts or these, we talked about movies that lecture you. Like, why don't I just skip through all that? Just forget it. Like, life's too short. for this 2-minute lecture.
You could get a service that automatically censors all that stuff for you, and you could call it Mid-Angel. Oh, on that note, next on Fantastical Truth, this week, this podcast releases episode 200. Stay tuned for new surprises that we will reveal from Lorehaven and its staff creators, not just next week, but throughout this year. And next week, we will pause to consider a rather pivotal theme for the Lorehaven project. Not just how we can find the best Christian-made fantasy, but why we must explore fantastical stories for God's glory. Well, sometimes that includes Disney movies, sometimes it doesn't, but either way, follow that C.S. Lewis wisdom about not wishing that the enemy was worse than he already is. You want to be on the lookout for better headlines about what the enemy is doing, and if you see those, don't feel disappointed because they aren't as bad as all that. Feel glad that even a rotten corporation with rotten impulses there can do some good things in the past as well as the present, maybe even in the future, maybe even for Disney. So let's hope for the best there as we continue to seek and find his fantastical truth.